Buena Vista Social Club is a new biographical jukebox musical about the creation of the album of the same name, and follows the artists behind it across two different time periods. The first being in the time immediately surrounding the Cuban Revolution, and the second being during the time of the recording of this album decades later.
I was invited to see Buena Vista Social Club on Broadway, and here's what I thought.
First, I would note that due to the diverging timeline structure of this show, this is a significantly different show than many of the bio jukebox musicals that have preceded it on Broadway.
Now, I will be fully honest that this is not my favorite subgenre of musicals, largely because I just feel like many of them follow the same general formula, and I've seen so many of them over the years that I've grown tired of it. They all retread a lot of the same beats, sort of, and if you've seen one, you've seen them all type of thing, just subtracting out one artist's music for another's. This is not that, in a good way. It avoids nearly all of the worst cliches of the genre, at least for me, because its structure is so different than the average bio jukebox musical. It's not like a rags to riches story about how someone was plucked from obscurity and immediately made famous, and then the problems of being rich and famous. It is not that, because of the show's format, where it weaves together two different timelines in a way that is almost revue-like.
Also worth mentioning is that while the book is entirely in English, the music is performed in its original Spanish.
And there is also an insert in the playbill explaining the meaning of all of the songs for anyone who might not speak Spanish.
I will say from personal experience, I know a bit of Spanish. I am not fluent by any means, but I was able to pick up some but not all of the songs. But for me, I was absolutely able to still follow the show. Most of the songs are merely being performed within the context of the story rather than telling the story. Again, this is a very differently made bio jukebox musical than many that have preceded it on Broadway that shares more in common with a revue style show. Now, getting in more specifically to the aspects of the show, the first thing I have to say is, of course, the music in this show is absolutely brilliant, and it is brilliantly performed, both by the cast and the onstage band. Due to the very concept of the album that this musical is based on, this music is some of the best that is created by a generation of performers. It is a compilation album of the best music of a generation, being performed by some of its best artists. And it is wonderfully showcased on this stage. I went in largely blind to this musical group, but I did discover throughout the course of the show that I did know a good number of the songs, merely being unaware of their connection to this group and album. And as I already stated, the music is performed live not only by the cast, but also by an onstage band, who are occasionally worked into the story of the show itself, while not being full-fledged characters with one notable exception. A lot of the show is about the creation of the music, and you see that not only in terms of the singers, who for the most part are the main characters, but also the instrumentalists. As for the rest of the production, the choreography of this piece is stellar and matches the energetic tone of a decent portion of the music. It completely fills the stage, and hopefully you can get a sense of it from this footage from Bows, which in itself is almost a fully choreographed number. The set is also visually beautiful despite its simplicity, and incredibly detailed. The entirety of the scenic design is essentially this courtyard, but it feels incredibly lived in, and is wonderfully transformed and complemented by the lighting design, which is able to make this relatively simple set make various different locations come to life, and not only make those locations come to life, but make it clear how they have changed between the two time periods that this show is set in, as we visit some of the same locations decades apart from each other, when a lot of history has transpired about these locations in between. I will be honest that I personally became somewhat obsessed with this specific area for no good reason. This is just a wing. It is not a set piece that swings out on stage at any point. It is never utilized for anything. It is just a wing that actors use to get on and off stage that is intensely detailed for its lack of use in the show. And I don't even think that you can see this wing from 2/3 of the audience. It just gives you an idea of the level of detail that is put into this set, despite its relatively simple layout. The costume design, meanwhile, manages to transport you to two parallel time periods in the same location, all filled with incredibly vibrant colors.
The one weak aspect of the show, I would really say, is the book. And I think in this section, it is important for me to note that this is an incredibly short show for a show with an intermission. It ran just about 2 hours, including the intermission when I saw it. And I would estimate maybe 2/3 of that is the music. Like, it is a very music-heavy musical for a traditional book musical. It's not sung through, but it is very light on book. It is very much focused on the music.
My earlier description of the show as revue-like is largely intentional and mostly due to the book. And I would also state that while the show is based on true events, it doesn't necessarily follow them, keeping the general idea of what happened while playing around with a bunch of the details. As someone who was not familiar with the origins of this group going in, I definitely wanted to research them after leaving this show, and I was kind of shocked to figure out how many details were changed for this show. Not the big picture of what this album was and who these people are, but a lot of the details that make up their life are not entirely true to history. Something I would also state as a result of the book is that I think you should probably come into this show with at least a basic understanding of the Cuban Revolution. While about half of the show takes place in the time immediately surrounding this event, it's never really addressed by the show, apart from how it immediately affects the characters' lives. Major events from the Cuban Revolution happen during this show and are not explained to you. It essentially expects that you come in knowing them. The actors involved, the ideas that are at play here. One of the central plot points in the show is two sisters that are conflicted as to whether or not to leave Cuba given the events of the revolution. However, apart from the mere fact that the government changed, the show itself does not really give much reason as for why they would want to stay or leave. It expects you to have that knowledge already, and as someone who did have that knowledge already, that wasn't a problem, but I can see it being a point that would be confusing for anyone who does not come into this show with a baseline of understanding of this history, because it is not explained in the show. Also, because of the significant number of characters in this show and the fact that there is essentially two versions of every single one of those characters due to the two time periods, there is not a lot of time given by the book for any character to get a significant level of character development.
The show's strength is really the music, choreography, the cast, and really it knows that. I think the show knows that its weakest element is the book, because everything else is incredibly strong. The book largely just serves as a bridge between the songs and lacks any kind of real character development or message that is portrayed beyond the music itself. Again, for a traditional book musical, there is very little book, and what there is largely very cliched, not for the genre, but just in general.
Now, continuing on to the cast, everyone on this stage is very talented at what they do, be it dancing, singing, or being an instrumentalist, which is what they need to be, given the concept of this story being that it is representing, quite literally, the best artists of a generation of performers, performing some of the best Cuban music of this era. I would honestly say that the show is largely an argument in favor of the creation of an award for an ensemble cast, because due to the sheer number of characters in this show spread across two timelines, no one really gets a lot of time to stand out as an individual, but they are all incredible as an ensemble.
In my mind, the strongest individual performance in this show is by Natalie Venita Belkan, who portrays Omara, a famous singer who at this point in her life has retired. A significant amount of the show is shown to be from her perspective, and she is really given the most emotional moments of the show.
In another year, I would say that I would expect her to be nominated for a Tony Award for this role, but if you know anything about the Broadway season this year, it is ridiculously loaded in the leading actress category that I would assume she is going to be considered eligible in. And I think ultimately the part is just going to end up being too small of a leading role.
This show is really for anyone who is looking for a night of brilliantly performed Cuban music on stage, as well as some incredible choreography. And it really delivers on those fronts while being somewhat held back by a cliched book and lacking development for its characters. It seems somewhat aware of its own shortcomings and making sure that you pay as little attention to those elements as possible, because everything else is so strong on that stage.
Every other element of this show, apart from the book, is really great. The choreography is eye-catching, the lighting and scenic design has so much for you to look at. The cast is performing this material at a level where you believe, even if you are not familiar with it, that this is some of the best music of a generation being performed by the best performers of a generation. And it is absolutely an entertaining night at the theater